Okay. I believe we're live now. Welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. And so today we're going to have a very interesting panel discussion webinar where we are focusing on the impact of the EU ETS. And so this is a subject which impacts many, many people within the industry. It is very interesting for the different ways it attacks ship owners. It also impacts the impacts the charterers, the environmental situation, but also then a lot of service providers are getting very involved in this. And so we're going to be looking at a lot of different angles during today's discussion. Before we get into that, I'd like to very quickly introduce myself. My name is Richard Watts. I'm the founder of the company HR Maritime, and my background is very much within chartering. And so I work with a lot of companies on their day-to-day issues related to chartering, contracts, contract disputes, and issues like that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just start off by giving the different panelists who are here today the opportunity to quickly introduce themselves, and so tell us who they are, where they work, and also why they're an expert on the subject that you're about to hear about in detail. And so in no particular order, I'd like to just go around the room and ask each person to give themselves a very quick introduction. Hugo, if you don't mind, I will start with you because you come up first on my screen.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hugo Wilson, and I'm on the management team at Hecla Emissions Management, which is an EU ETS service provider set up as a joint venture by the Affinity Shipping Group in London and the Wilhelmsen Group in Norway. Good afternoon, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Hugo, and very much looking to hear all about what you guys do and how you're helping companies in this industry at the moment. And so moving on, Pasquale, if I can ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thank you, Richard. Thank you, BS Group, for inviting us. I am Pasquale Bisogno. I'm working for D'Amico Shipping since quite long. I was in charge at the beginning in new buildings, after technical department, and nowadays I'm in charge of fleet performance department, decarbonization. So for EU ETS, I was the person in charge in order to come across all departments in order to face this big challenge, new regulations and coming regulations.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pasquale. I'm very delighted to have you with us today. And so, Ariel, can I ask you to introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ariel. I head up the product team at Sofar Ocean. We're a maritime tech company that offers a voyage optimization solution powered by the world's largest open ocean sensor network. So we're really here to help shipping companies operationalize their emissions management strategies as they sail.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And again, very much interested to hear how you manage that and how you make it work on a day-to-day basis. Ralf, glad you were able to join us just at the last moment, but perfectly on time. If I could ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Richard. My name is Ralf Garnn. I'm from Managing Director at OceanScore. At OceanScore, we help clients manage all the challenges that comes with EU ETS. And we have about 50 companies now. And I can say that over the last couple of months, we gained quite a bit of expertise because we basically discussing all the challenges that companies have right now with charterers, with owners and DOC holders, but also with all the verifiers, the ship-to-shore system providers, because one thing is to manage ETS, the other thing is to get the data correct, which is the basis for managing ETS, right?
I think so, and that's certainly very much a key in today's industry is data and how do we manage that data and make sure we know what's going on. So thank you very much, and pleasure to have you with us today. And so moving on to Risto, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hello, my name is Risto-Kariranta, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ahti Climate, and working on shipping emission compliance, cost optimization, and compliance matters or in general, so including EU ETS, but not limited to that. Also working on fuel maritime and CII related topics.
Excellent. Well, yes, there are a lot of topics which are quite closely related, and that's also interesting to see whether we should be expecting some more in the works as well at the moment. And so just to give a bit of a perspective on this, we're looking at this from different points of view. For those people who have just joined us, we've got about 220, 230 people who have joined us today. And so obviously a topic which is very relevant to a lot of people out there. And so we'd very much like to explore this, as I said, from the point of view of the ship owner, but also from the charterers, be they voyage charter, a time charter, also looking at companies which are chartering vessels out as well, and also looking at the different services that we are looking at in this industry and the different ways that companies are being helped in terms of managing their day-to-day performance. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to BS Group for organizing this webinar today, and also for the different webinars that they organize on a regular basis. And also a huge thank you to OceanScore and also to Sofar Ocean for sponsoring today. Thank you very much for the sponsorship of today's webinar, making it possible. So I'd like to start off kind of looking at this from a bit of a high level. And it's interesting, whenever we're looking at kind of the relationship between parties. Before we do that, we do have a poll. And so there is a poll question. I'd like to know, how familiar are you with the EU emission trading system? And so we'll have a number of these polls that come up during the course of the discussion. And so it's just to give an idea of where you stand and what you know and how you feel about these issues, because then we can also really tailor the discussion to the needs of the participants. Now, obviously, it's come up on your screen, and so you can put your answer there and submit it, and then we will have the answers coming up in a little bit. I'd also like to mention that you have the opportunity to put up questions, and so there is a Q&A section. You can put up questions if you have them, and we will stop for those questions on a regular basis to see what questions are coming up and how we can handle them. Now, in terms of the relationship between ship owners and charterers, I'm just curious to know, we see these new regulations coming in, and we see a kind of the interaction between ship owners and charterers. And so, Pasquale, I guess this question goes straight to you as the, let's say, the ship owner in the room. But how do you see this this affecting the information exchange between ship owners and charterers? Do you see it going fluidly? Do you see it as a source of potential contention?
Yeah, it depends. It depends because as D'Amico, we are managing vessels, own vessels in time chartering, time charter out and on spot. Plus, we are also managing vessels in time chartering, both spot and time charter out. If you are dealing with a very experienced charterer, so mostly on tanker side, so the information is very easy, the flow is very easy, and also the type of let's say trading we are doing on tanker side is quite established since long. So it's very easy. We have more time to deal with charterers, and we don't have any implications both on. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, Pasquale, we can hear you quite well. We
yes.
seem to. There we go. Please go ahead. You were saying the implications on the tanker side. We seem to be having a little bit of technical difficulties, and so we can hear Pasquale, but I'm not sure whether he can hear us at the moment. And so I'd just like to kind of move on, and we'll come back to Pasquale in a minute because I'd like to hear the rest of that answer. But Ariel, you said that you're doing a lot of kind of voyage optimization in your day-to-day business. How do you find that this is helping with the exchange of that information between the parties? Are you finding that companies are using that as a means of exchange of information?
Using what specifically?
Well, essentially, the information that you're giving them, does that mean that they are able to then exchange more easily the information between themselves and able to then benefit from that exchange of information?
I would say right now the exchange of information is still pretty challenging, and it's not necessarily something that our platform is designed to support. We're more focused on helping companies owning and operating their vessels optimize in the most efficient way that they can, integrating those EU-ETS costs, CII constraints, fuel cost, time cost, et cetera. And for TCN, helping companies figure out the extent to which trying to optimize for the current state of the vessel or optimize for a claim might make more sense for their business, given the vessel that they're working with. So I'm actually also very curious to hear Pasquale's answer to this question.
Pasquale, are you back with us?
Yeah, sorry to miss you. I was saying that mostly on tanker side, we have very long relationship with charters. So the flow is very easy, and also their knowledge about these new regulations is quite large. Instead, we are dealing also on spot, on dry side with own, let's say, with charters which we just trade for one single voyage. And there we have seen a big lack of information. So there it's not so easy to deal with them, also both on legal side, technical side, operation side. So really with them at this stage, February, mid of February, we see that still there is a lot of lack about the full information.
And so it's an interesting point you make there, because obviously different companies within the business and so even different sectors have different levels of knowledge of what's going on. And so this is something that I'd like to broaden the discussion out a little bit. And so Ralf, I mean, in terms of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, I guess you're talking to a number of different companies. You said you have a number of different companies using your system. How do you manage this? You must have very different levels of knowledge between the customers you have. How do you manage this on a day-to-day basis?
So indeed, customers and prospects have a very different level of knowledge. When you spoke with companies in November, December last year, they were ready for EU ETS, but they meant they had opened up a trading account. So when you dug deeper into the processes, you found out that the first issue was getting the calculations right. Most of the verifiers, the class societies, and also voyage optimization companies basically calculate the emissions per voyage. A lot of class societies were only doing it on a yearly basis, but have now started to calculate emissions on a voyage base and also EUAs on a voyage base. So that meant that when you know your EUAs on the voyage base, you are good, but you don't. You are not good. That's where it really starts, because what companies need to make sure is, first of all the calculations are correct, because once they have submitted invoices, EUA invoices or funds invoices to the charterers start to check this. They have their own systems. They verify on their own whether what they receive is correct, even though a stamp of a verifier is there. And we noticed that even though many statements have been validated, that had already been validated for MRV, that even though even MRV statements were wrong in the last 4 years, because nobody really had checked that. And now the charterer checks, and you have to be right. So that's the first thing, manage data quality. And then make sure that whatever you will request from the charterers or the owners ends up on your account. So you have to have a tracking system that really ensures that everything you invoice, first of all, is correct, and secondly, is being paid, so that you're not exposed to volatility of EUAs. Right now, they are really cheap, but that might not be the case forever. So the entire process from getting the initial information about the voyage into your system until you finally next year surrender the required EUAs needs to be managed, and nearly hardly anybody is ready for that. And what we also discovered is that even though large companies have set up their own system, as Pasquale just mentioned, now that the first voyages have been finished and the EUAs for January have been basically calculated, they find a big mess because nothing works.
Okay, there's an awful lot to unpack there, and I think there's a lot of things that I'd like to go into a lot more detail on that. I think that the easiest way within this kind of discussion is, because I obviously, there's so much we have to talk about, and there's so much that's actually involved in a discussion of the ETS that I want to avoid kind of jumping around between different subjects. And essentially you have the different systems that are being used by different companies, but then also you have the understanding the regulations themselves. You have the calculations which are being made, but you also have then the importance of setting up the account and managing the relationship, and then also actually buying and selling those allowances, and kind of ends up becoming quite a wide area. In terms of kind of going back a little bit to the internal systems, and going back to you, Ariel, if you don't mind, I mean, the voyage optimization systems. How does systems that you work with, how does that actually help a trading company, in a chartering company or a ship owning company, actually quantify, manage their day-to-day activities? How do they use this information in real time?
Yeah, so very much we are a partner to some of the other services here that our customers are also using. So I think one of the first things that we really encourage our customers to do is get clear on what their EUA buying and trading strategy is. Excited, Hugo, to hear you talk a little bit about that. But I think the most important thing is we are a system that is designed to take any subset of inputs and help customers understand what the implications of sailing with those inputs are. So depending on what EUAs cost for that company, depending on what the charter party agreement looks like, depending on whether there's flexibility with arrival times or fuel consumption, we really help companies predict what the voyage outcomes will be with it in sailing with those conditions. And if they don't like how those voyage outcomes are tracking, they're able to make changes in real time to how they're sailing in order to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for. So it's very much about providing transparency around how the on-voyage sailing process will go, so they can ensure that by the end of the voyage, everything is expected in terms of fuel burned, ETAs, et cetera. And that whole voyage was sailed according to that broader strategy that they've laid out. So we're really encouraging them to partner with a number of the other companies present here to think through what that means, and then make sure that that really drives what the on-voyage experience is, on-voyage decision-making is, making sure that process is very transparent and predictable.
Excellent. Well, obviously, what you do on a day-to-day basis is very, very important for your clients, and must involve an awful lot of interaction with them. Is it most of it on land, or is it also on the vessel itself?
Yeah.
How's that work?
So we're a little bit unique in that our solution was built for captains first. So we've got a robust application aboard the vessel for captains to be able to understand weather, understand trade-off implications, import routes, all of that. But we've also got a very deep shoreside component servicing most all shoreside teams. And a lot of the decision making under safety contexts happens, of course, aboard the vessel, but any commercial implications shoreside teams are using to kind of predict out what will some of these changes mean, and what interventions can be made in order to achieve the voyage outcomes they're looking for.
Excellent. I imagine it must become vastly complicated. I'd like to go back into that a little bit more in detail, but I'd like to bring Risto and Hugo into the conversation. Risto, in terms of the interaction between the owners and the charters, I mean, what is your take on this? And are we moving in the right direction in terms of information flows and exchange of information?
Yeah, I think so. That it's of course there has been a little bit learning from both sides in the beginning, and of course the approach of the different owners and charters are differing from each other, and there is a lot to learn about how to build the system. Even it has already started, but it seems that things are starting to get more in a nice way, and it seems that there is of course probably the biggest differences between the charters are that in time charter cases it's completely different story than with the voyage charters, and where you need to basically be working on a voyage level invoicing and allowance acquiring and so forth, whereas in the time charter cases there is more trust between the owner and the charter, that things will move in a nice way even on the long run.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense, and so let's certainly remain positive about that. And Hugo, I mean, we were talking about the different levels of different levels of knowledge of clients out there. And so obviously you're dealing with them on a daily basis and trying to help them with setting up the accounts. I know that there was a certain amount of unknowns even quite recently. And so how do you manage this kind of informing your clients sufficiently, making sure that they know all the information they need to make the right decisions? How do you work on that?
Well, we first have to figure out what their level of understanding is. And it wasn't helpful that the regulation changed at the very last minute. And suddenly the definition of compliance entity moves to, by default, the registered owner of the vessel, rather than the definition of ship owner or ISM code holder. So right at the last minute, the definition of compliance entity changes. And if you already didn't have a great understanding of the regulations, it doesn't help that the regulations then change a few days before we go live. And then also what hasn't helped customers either is that on the 1st of February, the EU published a list of the compliance entities that are invited to open maritime operator holding accounts. But the list that they published was effectively just the ISM companies and wasn't the registered owners that the regulation changed to. So we've had a lot of customers that realize they're not on their list because, in fact, the third-party ship manager is on the list instead. So then they have to find out where their administering authority is. So I think a lot of people haven't taken the time, a lot of the people we speak to haven't taken the time to understand like the basics and the foundations of the regulation, and instead put the cart in front of the horse and jump straight into clever trading strategies, repo agreements with the EUAs, talking to us about futures contracts and whether there's an options market available. And all of that is very doable. But in order to be there, you need to have an account, first of all, and you need to understand precisely what your requirements are. And I think that's what slowed everything down a little bit, is that in terms of people getting ready for compliance, is that they focused too much on the trading and didn't focus enough on the regulation and the actual, like, the back office and the administration that goes along with the ETS. And most of the ETS, by and large, none of our customers really want to trade this to make a lot of money out of it. People are doing this because they have to. And understanding that actually that process of getting everything in a position so you're not falling foul of the regulations at the end of the year is actually a lot more complicated than people thought it was. And I think that's what we're dealing with at the moment. We're going backwards and saying, before you even get to the clever trading strategies, do the basics first.
And I think it's an interesting point you make, actually, because I mean, we the opportunities for trading ETS they might seem quite attractive, but if a company is particularly interested in trading carbon credits, they can, and so they'd already have desks set up for that, and so it's almost adding this layer of complexity. Figuring out, you mentioned the change at the last minute about the definition of the party responsible for compliance. On the face of it, it might seem like quite almost a technical change. Can you actually, what exactly does that change mean to ship owners and different companies involved?
Sure. So the way that the regulation was originally written was that the ship owner or entity that has taken over the duties of the ISM code will be the compliance entity. So it was a sort of an open definition, either or. There was a lot of pushback from the third-party ship managers that who hold the ISM code for a lot of ship owners, that they don't want to be the compliance entity and take that compliance risk away from the ship owner. In fact, the third-party ship managers want to say, no, we don't want to be the responsible entity. You need to be the entity as the ship owner. And the EU listened to the concerns of the third-party ship managers and have now changed it, that it is by default the registered owner of the ship that is the compliance entity, and by means of contractual arrangement can get the ISM code holder to do it. But that's another level of administration, basically, that again, you have to go to the administering authority and say that is the system you're putting in place. You can't just palm it off to the technical managers anymore. And I think that it's led to a lot of confusion, especially to those customers that were previously relying on their third-party ship managers to be the compliance entity. Most of those third-party ship managers are saying no. They don't want to be that compliance entity, and it leads to registered owner, because also, as we know in shipping, registered owner, I mean, that's a term in itself that inspires some confusion. And so, yeah, it's a host more bureaucratic issues that have been raised by it that currently people are sorting through, supposedly by the 40-day maritime operator holding deadline.
I mean, you raised some very interesting points, actually, because as you say, the registered owner, I mean, from the outside point of view, it should be quite a simple point. But when you look at the ownership structure of any vessel out there, then, I mean, you look at a Q88 for a tanker and you see all the different parties involved, it suddenly becomes very, very, very complicated. This is interesting, actually, Pasquale, from from your point of view, how did this change of the party responsible, did it make any difference to your group, or were you basically already set up to be in position for this and it didn't make any day-to-day change?
Yeah, actually, just to come back just a little bit to what Hugo was raising, he has got a nice point, regarding ship owner that is responsible for EU-ETS, dealing with the ship manager. We are, as D'Amico, we are owning also Ishima, that is a Singapore-based ship management. So we are dealing also with third party as department. And we have seen that small owners, if small owners are giving the management to a ship manager, it does not have set up to face also this big regulation like ETS. So the opening to manage also EU-ETS should be there. That's why at the end the regulation was a little bit open as responsibility side. So I see that, most of ship manager, owner, third parties that we are managing, they're asking us support to manage this, let's say, this regulation. So as owner side, we are, let's say, medium-sized owner. So we decide to do everything internally. So we manage everything from computation of calculations, draining of data from the vessels. So dealing with the class, so we run up an interface with our ROs. So at the end, as medium-sized owner, it does make sense managing 120 vessels to let's say, to build up an own software and dealing with all parties involved. But for small size owner, like third-party owners, most of the time, there is no reason because there is no scale up. So the only way is to have support of let's say, service companies like OceanScore, Sofar Ocean, and so on and so forth. So it's not an easy issue because the difference between before and now is it is that before there was a let's say, MRV audit just once a year, where 5% of, let's say, allowance was there. Now we are doing verification and certification every let's say leg for MRVs called voyage. So there are many voyages every 7 days. So if you make a mistake, it's very easy that you jump over 5%. So you should have a very, very good structure in order to face this issue. So I agree 100% on what Hugo was saying. That really is, it's not an easy piece of cake to manage, actually.
It's interesting, actually, because shipping itself, I mean, if you look at ship owning, it is actually quite a fragmented industry, and so the number of very, very large ship owners is actually not that many, and even those don't have that much a percentage of ownership of the ship owning world, and then the effect often of these regulations is often making life a lot easier for larger players because they do have the structure in place to actually manage these things. And so it's actually a question I'd like to get back to in a second, whether it's possible that this might be kind of pushing us towards more consolidation within the world of ship owning. However, before we do that, there is a poll question that I'd like to bring up on the screen. And so there's a poll question, which is, in your opinion, what is the primary goal of the EU ETS? And so it should be coming up right now. Possibly you'll see it as a bit of a provocative question, but I'm curious to just know a little bit what the answer to that is, and then I can kind of then move back to the question we had before and see the answers there. So in your opinion, what is the primary goal of the EU ETS? And options: carbon reduction, economic incentives, regulatory compliance, market-driven emissions control, or other, please specify. And so it'd be interesting to see what the answers for that are. Also, before we do move on to kind of the next area that I'd like to dive into, we did have a question just before where we were asking people, how familiar are you with the EU emission trading system? And so the answers there actually that were coming up, I had them previously on my screen, but basically there was about the vast majority was falling into the somewhat unfamiliar category. So I'm not remotely surprised. I find when I talk to people on a day-to-day basis, and you talk to people, and in fact I have it here, 36% said somewhat familiar, and then there's probably the majority is just a little bit less familiar, but very familiar is a small number of people. So it's interesting to see how this is impacting it. Going back to the question that we've got open now on the screen, what is the primary goal of the EU ETS? I'd be interested to have the point of view of the panelists and just to know what your thoughts are on this, without putting you on the spot too much. And Ralf, I'd like to just have an idea what you think here. What are your thoughts?
Well, EU ETS has been around for a while, so the utility industry and aircraft industry has been part of EU ETS for many years. In the end, it's basically put a price on pollution. So, and support the climate goals in the end. That being said, I just wanted to add to the previous discussion that I see a difference between pure owners and owner managers. So if you're a pure owner, we see that sometimes you want to keep the responsibility for surrendering, and the pure managers actually do not want to take that responsibility. If you are owner manager, so both, if you have both views, then usually the responsibility is taken by the manager as the DOC holder of surrendering. When you are purely manager and not owner, then you want to do the work, but you don't want to have the responsibility. This is what we see a lot. And what you also have to consider is if the owner is an SPV. SPVs usually don't even have much stuff, or if at all. So it's another story for funds that have ships and SPVs. They don't even have the capability, so they have to give they have to transfer the responsibility to some DOC holders.
But I guess the difficulty then is that there's the financial implications of the regulations, and so then we go back to the question of the ship managers being reluctant to take on this responsibility unless they're fully covered on the other side. I think, yeah, and you make a lot of very interesting points there. I noticed that you did a very good job of kind of avoiding the other question of the primary goal of the EU ETS. I don't know if that's something you do want to touch on as well, or
well, basically, it's like it's in the end, it's supporting the climate goals and reduce carbon. Yes.
Do you, and I think that's essentially where we see it at the moment. Do you, and it's a bit of a wide question, but do you see it as an effective method of achieving this? I know it's quite a wide question.
Okay, so we did a study on carbon reduction of the global fleet. We have a database with 130,000 vessels, and we track these vessels every hour on pollution, especially on carbon, NOx, PM, and SOx. And what you can see is that in the last year, actually, the carbon emission has been reduced across all industries. The year before, it was still container, we're still up by 5.6% due to the COVID situation, and also passenger and cruise ships were up a little bit. But last year, across the entire industry, carbon emissions have been reduced by about 3%. So not close to 3%. So that's good. It's actually working. What it in our view, what it really does is it fosters innovation. There's so much pressure on shipping companies to meet, for instance, CII rating targets and also emission targets to reduce emissions due to the EU ETS pressure, that a lot of companies have started to try to figure out how they can further reduce emissions by optimizing voyages, operations, and also by retrofitting vessels, and of course by a lot of new buildings that will of course add to emission reduction as well.
And you, in fact, you bring me on to the next point that we want to really discuss. I mean, whether this will be a driving force for the adopting of new practices and technologies, and whether companies will take this as kind of an opportunity to invest in new ways of finding those efficiencies. Risto, just like to bring you in the conversation there. Do you think that this will be essentially a driving force for adopting more efficient practices?
Well, it's one way of accelerating that kind of behavior. Of course, it's how to put it. If we think about the operational costs of 2022, when the bunker price was about $1,000 per ton, it didn't stop shipping, and now the cost is still less combined with the ETS cost and the fuel cost. So it's not a very dramatic change, and basically the same benefit you would have gained during those high bunker prices with all the energy efficiency measures and such. So it makes always sense to save energy and try to avoid the emissions, but it doesn't seem to be the primary driver even after EU ETS coming into force. I consider that much bigger impact will be with FuelEU Maritime, that will really start to force or mandate the vessels to start to use low carbon fuels. Here the incentive is not sufficient for driving to use for example biofuels or RFNBO energy sources.
Just on that point you made there, I mean, can you very quickly outline why you think FuelEU Maritime will have such a bigger impact?
The penalty clause in FuelEU Maritime is so much higher that it actually then it's much more cost efficient to be compliant on the regulation by changing to use of alternative fuels. So the monetary incentive is in a completely different level there.
Okay,
yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, I would say I totally agree with that. I mean, currently with the EUA price where it is, I don't think the ETS is having an impact at all on shipping at the moment. They're currently the ETS, EUA price is around 56 euros, 55 euros on spot. At the 40% phase in, that means an MR tanker sailing round voyage from Houston to Rotterdam is spending about $750 a day on ETS costs, right? And they're earning roughly about 40,000 a day for a non-eco. I really don't think that the ETS at the moment, the ETS is so relevant in the spot tanker market that the charterers don't care about it, and the owners they're just paying freight, and the owners don't even really care either. The freight hasn't really changed. The owners are just sorting it out themselves. The costs are nowhere near severe enough to actually impact the market yet. I think that may change in the future, but it's going to take several years. I would agree totally with Risto that the costs are a lot more significant and the understanding is a lot less around fuel EU maritime.
No, and it's interesting to say that because there was a study done by UNCTAD about a year or so ago where they were talking about the impact on countries around the world of decarbonization, and when you saw the spikes in the container rates that we saw a year or two ago, they completely dwarfed anything that we would ever see from these at the moment. And so the amount you're talking about, it would almost seem that the cost of calculating and complying are probably greater than the actual cost of the carbon of the EAUs. Is that true?
I think potentially. I think what people need to be looking for, and the reason why people are investing in these systems to get it right, is two things. Firstly, these initial months and this initial year will set a precedent going forward. So you want to get it right the first time, and you want to get your contracts secure. You want to get your processes in place, because it's going to be very hard to go back to, say, your charterers and say, well, now that the costs have gone up, we'd actually like to change the way that this takes place. So I think first thing is, setting the precedent. The second thing is the risk of non-compliance, I think, is much more of a risk factor than the actual cost of complying. That you don't want to get to the end of the year, and even if the volumes aren't great, you still don't want to be on the EU's naughty list. At some point, the EU are going to look to take a scalp in this, and nobody wants to be that company.
Yes. Whose head's on the chopping block, and everyone's going to try and avoid being in the firing line. And so, Ariel, I mean, we're talking about the cost of complying, and so obviously, when you're looking with your clients at the different options for voyages, in terms of the different factors which affect the cost of a single voyage, where does this rank? Is this actually worth paying much attention to in the day-to-day scale of things? I mean, with vessels costing $40,000 a day, surely there are other things which are.
Yeah, no, totally. I think honestly, we've seen quite a bit of a breadth of cultural approach to these emissions at different shipping companies. I think certain organizations are really interested, like Hugo mentioned, of setting a precedent not only externally but internally. They want to make sure that their organization will be resilient once these costs are deeply material to their businesses. So I think in terms of how they structure operations in a way that will make them prepared when those costs jump another 30% next year for EU ETS, and when other teeth get added to some of this other emissions legislation or regulation, they want to be prepared. So I'd say there's been kind of a breadth of, we have the ability to optimize using EU ETS as an input parameter to the optimization now. I'd say about 50% of our companies are actually using it versus kind of waiting to see how others use it, still formulating their strategy, et cetera. But those same companies that are using that as an input, even today when the costs aren't material, are also thinking about, how is this going to change my strategy around technical performance management of the vessel. They're the ones who are also thinking about new fuel types. We're working with a couple customers who have wind sails, pilot vessels with wind sails that are installed. So really thinking and planning ahead for the future. So really quite a breadth there for sure.
Excellent. No, and certainly there are a lot of different measures being taken at the moment. I've seen that Cargill and Dreyfus are both putting out publicity about the vessels they have with wind sails, and so it's interesting at the moment. We have some questions that are coming up on the Q&A, and I can actually see that a number of the panelists have actually been very, very diligently answering some of these questions while they've been at the same time giving answers to me, which is very impressive. There's an interesting question which has come up from a certain Sinem Ojis, asking if each ship belongs to a different legal entity. And Hugo, maybe a question for you. If each ship belongs to a different legal entity within a shipping company, but only the head entity is mentioned under the administrative authority, how would reporting work for emissions taxes? Does this imply that each ship entity needs to issue a mandate to the shipping entity? What are your thoughts on that? It seems a little bit complex.
Yeah, and that's what we help customers to untangle.
And so, but yeah, I mean, what do you map out their organization? How this works? Talk us through it.
Yeah, quite literally. You've got to understand the different SPVs, the Thetis MRV company, the administering authority, whose name has been on the list, what the technical manager thinks, and you do have to basically sit down with the paperwork and figure out what's the best approaches. We're also seeing, for example, we're seeing administering authorities interpreting the rules differently is the wrong way to say it, but having different approaches when it comes to opening maritime operator holding accounts. That some of the administering authorities are a little bit more lenient on letting us open one MOHA for a company that's a little bit more complex. Others are insisting that we need to stick by the letter of the regulations, and there are different MOHAs if it's the case that it's not with the ISM company. But that's the same. I mean, it's similar to how establishing trading accounts with the registries work, that each administering authority or each national administration has slightly different implementing rules. And we're seeing that translate into MOHAs as well. And so it very much is on a case-by-case basis. And unfortunately, that's the boring thing that we're currently working through with clients at the moment, is figuring that out for them, lodging the applications, and making sure that they have something in the door before the apparent deadline.
I mean, the ownership structure can be quite complex within ship owning companies. Do you think that regulations like this might actually push companies to having less complex structures?
So my cynical thoughts are that this is sort of the reason that this added bureaucracy is something the EU is looking to create, because it's a roundabout way of clamping down on shipping's interesting structures. It's by making it very difficult for these structures to operate administratively. It does make you think that maybe there should be a bit more, I don't know, maybe the EU wants to push shipping to be treated as more like a regular industry, because we know it's very much not at the moment.
No. I mean, I see the discussions going on at the moment about how to treat the container ships as well, the container lines, how they're going to be treated by the authorities. So there's quite a complex area at the moment. I'd like to come up with we're going to come up with another question in a sec. And so I'd just like to kind of understand a little bit better. And this is Ralf coming for you. There's a question from the chat, and it's asking about the data quality and the data collection. And how do you manage the challenges with getting good data quality and ensuring that this is then collected from the vessels?
So basically, we leave it up to the customer how they want to transfer the data. So some customers prefer to use their ship-to-shore system because they already generate good quality, and from that system, the data is provided to the verifier that only verifies what they already created. Some customers prefer that we connect to the verifier because verifiers validate voyage-based emissions, and out of that we can calculate the EUAs per voyage, or even for time frames, weekly, monthly, what Pasquale already mentioned. So it depends. We offer whatever the customer would like to do. Whatever the customer feels comfortable with, we recommend connecting to the verifier because they validate already the data, and it's most likely in an aggregated form going to be similar to what the verified data will be at the end of the year. Yeah, so that's really the answer to that.
But so in that case, do you have an awful lot of different kind of types of data coming in? I mean, do you have to be very, very flexible in terms of the type of data that you can then receive and manage, or do you?
Quite standard. There are a few KPIs that you need. from the vessel, some statements of facts. It's basically in the noon reports. If it's not in the noon reports, then we will discuss this with the ship-to-shore system provider so that the verifier or we directly get the data that we need in order to calculate emissions and EUAs, and also the times that are important so that we precisely can, on time base, calculate really 31st midnight and start a new calculation at 0 the next day, things like that. But initially, it's I think when you work with the ship-to-shore system provider or verifiers for the very first time, and for the very first time set up an API, there's a little bit more discussion. But once you have done it 2 or 3 times, it becomes smoother and smoother. And today, I think we have pretty much set up to the main verifiers and ROs, and also to the big optimization companies that also often work actually for the verifiers as a supplier of data.
Okay, makes sense. And so, Pasquale, I mean, just to bring you into this, and I see that you're also quite busy replying to people on the chat as well. Thank you very much, making my job an awful lot easier. And so, Pasquale, in terms of this data provision, because I mean, you have to report different information to under different requirements, and so I think Risto mentioned earlier the requirements of the CII. Do you manage to package this in? Is it very standardized, this data? Can you provide similar information to different authorities, or is it kind of a very separate task for all the different areas that you need to work on?
Actually, we are basing our data. The first important thing is that to have a trusted source of data. So single source of data, having a single, let's say, entries on board. So you also make the life on board easier for captains, because many times you have many softwares. They, on one software, captain is putting numbers, another software, second officer. So in order to have good data, you need to give to them a single source of data. So after we receive this source of data, we can start calculation for CII, for ETS, in the future for fuel EU. So this is very important on the principle that garbage in, garbage out. So this is what we face in the past years. So this is the first thing. Once we set this, and the culture on board is clear, so they know very well what is CII, what is EU-ETS, how do they have to report. So the reporting should be also reporting form should be very clear for them. So once you have them, basically we are approaching in different way. Also because regulation, as we know, are having a different approach. For IMO DCS in the future, we have LCA approach. For EU-ETS, we have tank to wake. In the future, for fuel, we will have well to wake. So we have same information coming from the vessels, but at the end, the outsourcing are different. By the way, we can see at the end of the story, reduction of CO2 emissions are having a common goal for all regulations. So regardless the regulations are coming and the calculation we have to do, basically what we need to do is to make the biggest effort, starting from LED lights coming to the wind propulsion. So very big, let's say, ends of the story. So we try always our best to reduce as much as possible, is even 1 ton of let's say, of fuel. So this is our basic approach at the end. So also let the vessel understand how to manage, how to run the, let's say, auxiliary engines, everything. That was something that in the past was not there. So even for maneuvering, some captain, same vessel, same maneuvering, but some captain running 2 generators, another captain just 1 generator. So this culture should be changed. So we are trying to standardize the approach of ship staff on board. And
in fact, the answer you gave, it leads very much onto a question which has come up on the chat. Before I do come up to that question, I'd like to bring up a poll question to the audience out there. And so the poll question would basically be, how has your organization adapted to the EU ETS regulations? It should be coming up on the screen there. And so to know whether your company has proactively embraced the changes or made moderate adjustments or no significant change or faced challenges in adapting. And so just to know where you stand and what the answers to that are. And so the question that was coming up in the chat, in fact, Pasquale, was touching on what you were just mentioning, but it was really asking which areas are you prioritizing? Because you mentioned a number of different areas for reduction of emissions, but what are you prioritizing at the moment as the greatest areas for reduction and reducing the emissions, but also minimizing your EU ETS costs?
Well, basically, as a fleet performance partner, of course, we have to face also commercial issues. So before to start any calculation, we have to understand whether the leg, the voyage, the charter party is feasible for commercial issue. Okay. So anyway, we start from the point that we don't have to reduce the CO2 emissions by installing on board the new technologies, but we start to reduce the, let's say the first reduction is to emit as less as possible. So this is the first approach, because as I've seen, there are many, let's say, service providers promising you 2%, 3%, 6%, installing very capital-intensive technologies. Okay, we agree, and we are very open to install new technologies. But let's say the first point is to emit as less as possible. We are quite lucky in D'Amico because we have quite new ships, eco ship we call. But by the way, the very, very strong point is to understand also operation, how to operate the vessels. So regarding, it's almost the same approach of CII. Regarding the CO2 emission for EU ETS, we plan well in advance, let's say the voyage. So we apply the optimization ship routing. And we see that even a small amount of CO2 less emitted, at the end of the day, will come with a very, very good impact for longer voyage, coming from US to Europe and from Far East to Europe. So every day can be a contribution for a small improvement in emissions and, of course, in the taxation coming from EU ETS.
It's interesting you say that because I also want to bring in the fact that we are seeing a number of disruptions at the moment, and so you can have the best laid plans in terms of your voyage, and then overnight the Suez Canal gets, well, not closed, but you want to avoid it because there's been a missile attack, or maybe there is a delay in the Panama Canal because there's insufficient water. How do these impact your approach to the EU ETS? And I'd also like to hear also from Ariel as well on this in terms of how do you manage it with your voice strategy. I mean, do you just have to adapt and nothing you can do, or can you then incorporate that into your answers, your reporting to the EU ETS system, Pasquale?
Yeah, actually, regarding this, the operation and of the vessel is prevailing. So, the regulation is there. The regulation is very simple. Unlikely for us, that does not give any chance to reduce this amount that is not depending on the operation of the vessel. So this is a little bit a lack point of the regulation. So unfortunately, you can do as best as possible as in terms of emission, but if you are facing a long stoppage at Suez Canal, likely you try your best to manage the energy efficiency of your generators, but other than that, unfortunately, you cannot do.
Makes sense. Ariel, I'd like to bring you in on that, but I'd just like to, before we do that, we've got some answers that came up for the for the questions that were put up before. And so, first of all, in your opinion, what was the primary goal of the EU ETS? And here we've basically see the answers coming up from two areas, and so most people choosing carbon reduction, as we heard, but also then market-driven emission control, and so that certainly makes sense and is what we're kind of expecting to hear. And then also, how has your organization adapted to the EU ETS? And here actually quite a range. We've got about 25% saying proactively embrace the changes, 18% saying made moderate adjustments, and then there's still about 35% who say it's not applicable. So just going back to that question in terms of kind of if we've got direct disruptions in the voyage, Ariel, how do you take these into consideration? Because there are things that can happen overnight. I mean, I've had a number of situations with different clients. One who received a bill from a ship owner because they decided to avoid the Suez Canal, and another from a client who basically they had to sail 3 weeks to go around the South America instead of waiting for they didn't know how long to go through the Panama Canal. How do you incorporate these things into your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so I think in terms of operating most efficiently, we ran a study at Sofar and basically determined that about 18% of all fuel consumption happens in heavy weather conditions. And I think when you go back to your earlier question about how do you kind of put some of these strategies into action on short, medium, and long time scales, the ability to simply sail in a way that best avoids bad weather, I think, is low on the list, or low when it comes to mind in terms of what people think about that they might be able to do operationally to better manage outcomes for a voyage, but it's something that we find to be like extremely material, and making sure that companies are empowered to do that with the best available data is really important. I think when those heavy weather situations come up and decisions are made where companies need to significantly delay ETA, that's it. A lot of that we can provide supporting information to shoreside teams to help manage relationships with their charterers, and help. It's not uncommon that we'll run retrospective analyses comparing expectations charterers had in terms of how a voyage should have been sailed or could have been sailed compared to the decisions actually made on the water. But it's often, we're there to provide support in those types of discussions between both parties, and otherwise are really just making sure our customers are best balancing safety, profitability, sustainability along the way.
Makes sense. And I mean, Ralf, in terms of the information you're collecting, I mean, what kind of different factors do you take into consideration? I mean, are you looking into obviously looking into the distances of traveled and the different information? What are all the different data points that you're bringing into consideration when you're looking at voyages?
Like to calculate the EU cost?
Yeah.
I mean, the definition is given by the EU. So you have to basically look at the emissions that vessels have created on 50% of the voyages from and to EU ports, all the voyages from within the EU from port to port and within EU ports. And then you calculate 40% of that for next year, and you discount ice class vessels by 10%. If you have a couple Caribbean islands, you also have to consider that. If you have to consider transshipment ports for containers, there are only 2, you have to consider that. So that's all built in the algorithms, and out of that, you basically calculate the EUAs that for a voyage or for a time frame you have to submit to whoever is responsible. Most of it will be going to the charter party, to the charterer. And some of it, if you have off-hire times or unemployment times, will go to the owner. So you have to figure out how much that was of the total voyage and break it down.
Do you have any thoughts on the share of that on voyage charter, in terms of where we might be standing, in terms of who ends up paying for that? I know it's a discussion going back and forth between charter and owner at the moment. I spoke to a charter the other day, and he basically said, at the moment, it just depends on the market. As long as the ship owner has strength, then it's going to go one side, and as far as the market goes the other way, it's going to push the other way. Do you have any thoughts on that, on where we might end up in the long term?
Not sure what your question is.
In terms of the share of the costs between the charterer and the owner on voyage charter.
I think most of it will be ending up with the charter.
Charter, in terms of included in the freight rate or paid for afterwards. Do you know?
Well, that depends on how you set up the contracts. So some of the contracts will be set up in a way that's part of the freight, and some of that will be set up that it will be paid afterwards once it's exactly known. But what we basically see is that many charterers want to have an idea of how much the cost will be for a given voyage. And so that's why we basically have created a simulator in our solution, so that every one who makes or has to kind of give an idea to the charterer of how much the cost will be on a voyage can simulate that.
And so how does that work then? You basically it's
Well, we
simulates
basically
what it will be.
We know the vessel, so we know the vessel be performance on certain voyages. We know that from our database already. And then basically you have to enter a few additional KPIs. For instance, the speed, the amount or the percentage of cargo that you have on the vessel, especially for container and a few other vessels that are not always fully loaded. And one more KPI, I forget. Anyway, so that has the time you will be waiting at anchorage or port during that voyage, because that also has an impact. And then basically you simulate the emission and also the UAs that will be associated to that voyage, and then you can either provide the charterer with an EUA number, or with a number when you convert it to funds on the amount of money, euro, dollar, that you expect on carbon cost for that voyage.
Okay, and so this is something you can essentially do for any vessel out there.
We can do it for any vessel out there, yes.
Okay, because there's a question that came up in the chat from Vikas Chuteta asking where did you receive the emission information for the 100,000 vessels that you mentioned?
So we've been working on this platform for more than 3 years. It took us more than 1 year to just clean up the AIS data, because chips jump a lot, and in reality they don't. We get information from data providers on every vessel, IMO number, engine configuration, etc., etc. We get weather data, and we have a lot of vessels from partners like MSC, where we have the noon reports from many thousand voyages. So we have created algorithms that for specific legs and voyages calculate the emission of a specific vessel, and then we take the information from the noon reports and validate our calculation with the real emission of that voyage. And when you have several thousand voyages, you get better and better. So on containers, we are now in the area of plus minus 2%, which is very good on voyage estimation. But we also have specialty vessels where we are still in the range of plus minus 25%. Don't have many voyages to verify our algorithms with. It's a little bit of artificial intelligence behind that. Yes, but it works actually quite well.
Okay. I mean, it sounds fascinating, and it sounds very, very useful, because it's something that we're often trying to make the best decision we can with the different vessels which are available. And so it's having that information can be very, very useful, because
it is also very, very useful with regards to Fuel EU, because if you want to simulate pooling, you actually need to know the vessels that might not be in your fleet or in the fleets that you have associated with. You want to have the best outcome on pooling, and that's where you can basically use that information in order to find your optimized pooling result, of the vessels that optimize your pooling result.
Okay. And so then you can make a much better decision across the board, and basically have better, clearer decisions going forward.
Exactly.
And so, Ariel, I mean, just bringing you on this kind of discussion, because it's interesting how companies are making their decisions on a day-to-day basis. I mean, obviously you're looking on on the vessels on a voyage per voyage and voyage optimization. Are you then expanding that to fleets and basically looking at the different opportunities for the fleets in terms of bunker purchases and things like that? How does that work in terms of your interaction with your clients?
Yeah, so definitely working on the fleet level as well. I think I just can't plus one what Ralf said here more about the importance of having great data to be working with. And I think one of the things that's actually got me the most excited about these new emissions regulations requirements are that companies are spending more time investing in the data they have, investing in the quality of that data. And that data is just so much more powerful and useful than I think shipping companies have really acknowledged to date. So when it comes to truly understanding that vessel's performance, its performance across different weather conditions, our voyage optimization solution also uses customers' data, cleans up that data for them, builds vessel performance models within 2 to 3% accuracy as well, because in the same kind of garbage in, garbage out comments Pasquale made earlier, you can't run an optimization with garbage in inputs. So to really have a robust model of the vessel and understand how it's performing, that's been a critical input to our optimization, and coupled with that high accuracy, whether that's really what drives it. But yeah, all of our customers are interested in analysis on a broader fleet level. They want to see performance across sister vessels. They want to be making decisions over longer timescales. So these are all areas that, we're exploring and have a lot of partners who are, ideating with us, excited to drive that forward.
May I add to that? EU ETS will enhance data quality by far. And why? Because charterers will check now. And what we have discovered only in the first month now is that the data that charterers received from verifiers on voyages didn't add up to what they calculated themselves. And what we discovered later was when we look back at MRV, that actually the verifier that I'm talking about, and this is not only one instance, has to go back to now for 4 years and correct all the MRV data because it was just simply false. But it's because nobody really, yes, they checked, but nobody really checked. This is going to change now.
Yeah, highly encourage all owners on the call. If data is not a massive priority for your business right now, highly encourage you to put that top of mind. All of these new solutions that are coming online are all powered by that data. Your data is so valuable, and the organizations you're working with to collect that data, manage that data, hold them to a high standard, because they hold an asset of yours that so valuable.
Yeah, it's also if the owner has a vessel and wants to optimize the vessel, you can only do that if you have correct data that you can really rely on. Otherwise, you always say garbage in, garbage out. So if you really want to make a difference, then make sure that your data is correct.
Yes, and you mentioned a number of times the Noon report that we've relied on for many years. I mean, I first came across the Noon report 25 years ago, and they haven't actually changed that significantly since in that period. We do have, and we're coming kind of towards the last 15 minutes or so of this the webinar discussion. We've got a question that I wanted to put out to the audience and also to yourselves. It's question should be coming up on your screen now. What challenges, if any, has your organization faced in complying with the EU ETS? And so that should be up on the screen now. And so this is really looking at kind of technological challenges, financial constraints, regulatory complexity, of lack of awareness. I'd be interested to have, we'll look at the audience's answer as it comes up. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of hear from you, because my next question is going to be where we're going from here, where we're going forward from here, and how is this going to impact the regulations going forward. But in terms of the challenges, I think it's interesting because you all look at this from different points of view. You all have different aspects of the different areas of the business. Hugo, bringing you on this discussion, when you're talking to your clients, what do you find is the biggest challenge at the moment as far as your clients are concerned in where you're helping them? So you seem to be still on mute, Hugo.
Apologies.
Perfect.
As I said before, the maritime operator holding accounts are still the biggest stumbling block. I think we're not actually going to have a full grasp on this until after the surrendering deadline in September next year. I think we've got the operator holding accounts to deal with. That's going to take a bit of time. I don't think it's going to be done within the time frame that the EU expects it to be done, but I think that's part of an issue. I think the way that owners are collecting EUAs is happening on such a varied basis that some owners are purchasing for their own account a war chest, some are receiving from charterers more like on the BIMCO clause, so within, say, 7 or 14 days after receiving the verified report. Others are receiving EUAs in a timely manner. Now, in a timely manner is interpreted by the charterers as the day before the deadline, and interpreted by the owners as just after we give the verified reports. So I think there's a lot of owners out there who are now a little bit worried that they're not going to receive the EUAs that they were supposed to receive until minutes to go before the deadline. At that point, then you have to distribute between the MOHAs if necessary. I think that we're not going to get the full picture until we've done the full first round of compliance, unfortunately. But the administrative hurdles in the short term are really what people are most worrying about.
Yeah, no, you make a couple of very, very important points there, because when you say the operator holding account not done within the timescale, do you think that is due to the responsible parties or the owners not necessarily being ready, or do you think there are going to also be large delays on the regulatory side?
I think there'll be both. I think the responsible entities are trying to, first of all, figure out who amongst them it is. And then once they've figured out who amongst them it is, and they've got the paperwork to prove that, then it's not always immediately obvious who their administering authority is if their name wasn't on the list to begin with. So then they have that extra step to do. I think there's confusion amongst a lot of those are the queries that we're getting on an almost daily basis now. Is ship owners popping up and saying, or technical managers popping up and saying, can you help us open a maritime operator holding account? We don't know where to start. And I think that will go on for a while.
It's also like some of them on the list might not trade anymore in EU, and others trade in EU, but they have never been on the list.
Yeah.
And they need to figure this out now. And then what you just said, Hugo, it depends on who the responsible party will be in the end, and not all of them have figured that out yet.
I was saying to Richard just before we started this call, but we're now getting having a lot of discussions with like leasing houses, for example, that are now figuring out that as they're the registered owner of the ship, maybe they have something to do with it. They assume the bareboat charterer would actually just be able to take responsibility for this. But if the bareboat charterer is then using a third-party manager who doesn't want to take responsibility, then it seems like the registered owner, i.e. the bareboat owner of the ship, is therefore compliant again, responsible again. So we're seeing a lot of new parties pop up that originally thought they were isolated from this, and actually they're being dragged kicking and screaming into it.
I mean, OceanScore has set up an entire service center just to help companies with this process.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Pasquale, just bringing up on this discussion, in terms of the kind of the challenges, the biggest challenges which we're facing due to the EU ETS, what would you see as being the biggest challenges from your point of view? Sorry, Pasquale, you're on mute.
Yeah, actually for us, the big challenge was just on the legal point of view, because until the end of 2023, the regulation was not fully clear. So, for the regulators, I believe for the forthcoming regulations like Fuel EU, I strongly, let's say, hope that they will come earlier, because monitoring plan ready for 1st of April is something really that it's very strange. So we start regulation and the monitoring plan is coming after, as well for the publication of responsibilities entities. So 40 working days since 30 of January, for a, let's say, well arranged company can be okay. But for small entities, which with whom we are facing, like we are running also one small cruise vessel, so we are still dealing with them to let them understand what EU-ETS is, and we will have a meeting next week, so they will have just 20 days to set up everything. So maybe they are going to give us the job, but by the way, I believe that everything should be clear at least 4 months in advance, in order to let all operators to take action and to understand what way to follow. So this is the let's say the legal compliance. It's okay, so we can face, but the arrangement before that is quite challenging.
And so, how much interaction do you have with the regulators in order to kind of push them for clarity and try and have some kind of clarity early in advance?
Yeah, likely when you write to EMSA, they will reply in 24 hours. So we have a very good relationship since we are running 120 vessels. So we are really dealing with them, I don't say every day, but every week. So, I think that also they like to deal with us, so they can have good insight from operators in order to understand whether there is some lack in the routes that they are running, basically. So it's a win-win process. By the way, one thing is you do during the previous year, so you are relaxed and you can think on it. And one thing is when you have just 14 days working days to set up everything. So it's a different story.
Yes, I can imagine that. Ariel, just coming over to you. I mean, talking about these challenges, and so obviously you're talking with a lot of different clients at the same time. What are you seeing as for them the biggest challenges of compliance with the ETS, the EU ETS?
I think all things compliance, all things data. They're definitely asking us, we've been asked, is the compliance component something that Sofar handles? We don't. We are very happy to have our customers partner with others in the room to drive that forward. But they're always, trying to figure out who might be the right person to be working with, looking for an organization that can provide direction and advice on how to navigate. So we've got a couple companies that we partnered with to kind of help usher our customers along to solve this challenge. But really the data and kind of navigating the system, it's been a challenge for a lot of folks we work with.
Okay, so basically compliance and data is data is something that you've mentioned a number of times. I think it's very, very important. Ralf, what are your thoughts in terms of the? Sorry, Risto, you jumped off there for a second, but you're back with us now. I can see you on the image. You disappeared for a second. Ralf, I'll just come back to you in 2 seconds. Risto, I'd like to have your point of view in terms of the challenges that you see with complying with the EU ETS at the moment.
I think the biggest challenge has been to get all the details fixed. It's not like there would have been one individual major issue. Of course, there has been some delay with the information from the regulators and so forth, but the core idea has been there available, and I would say that with those stakeholders I've been working with this, we had about 85% of details settled before the regulation actually started, and then the rest has been sorting out the internal and external smaller details. But yeah, definitely, I think pretty much no one was 100% ready when the regulation started, but now things are sorting out. So
as always, it tends to be a game of catch up and trying to catch up with where we have to be. And Ralf, just your thoughts on terms of the challenges that your clients are facing. What do you see as the biggest challenges they're finding in this area?
So for the larger companies, it's the complexity of the many departments involved. Some started with Excel and it's not going to work with Excel. And the many different stakeholders involved, like owner, charter, DOC holder. So this entire complexity that it created, and then to some degree, missing data. So missing data, insufficient data, or two parties had data but different results. So align on the data, that was a huge issue. What's needed in the end is really a single source of truth, I call it that way, so that all these stakeholders, involved people, have one basically source of true data. And then what I expect to still come is the adoption of the various or the many variations of the contracts. So like, yes, there's a BIMCO clause, a shipping clause, a voyage clause, and a time charter clause, but there are going to be so many variations, and to adapt to that is going to be another challenge.
I think you make a good point there. We have time just for one last poll question that I want to bring up on the screen, and this is kind of looking at how optimistic are you about the future impact of EU ETS on sustainability initiatives? And so really looking at kind of the sustainability side of the equation. And so I'd be interested to see what the answers there and where we see the different answers coming up here. And we are also coming towards the end of this discussion. Before I do bring it towards a close, and we'll have a look at the answers as they come up here on the screen as they come up. I'd like to bring in kind of any kind of final thoughts, any final comments, any things that you didn't get the chance to really portray when you were discussing or answering any of the questions that I asked. Does anyone have any? Do you want to kick off with any kind of final thoughts of maybe about where we're going to go forward, or some of the areas of opportunity related to this discussion? Maybe Hugo, I'll pass it over to you.
A lot of ship owners that we're dealing with are seeing an opportunity now. That if you think that that the ETS isn't going away, the ETS will be around for probably the rest of these ships' lifetimes, and probably more. And if you're thinking long term, then being able to buy in and make a little war chest of EUAs at below the €60 mark is something that a lot of our customers are taking advantage of now. I think there's big opportunity at some point when the price returns. We'll be looking back at these days thinking, wow, why didn't we buy more? And I think at that point there'll be, even if you're relying on charterers to receive EUAs from, which a lot of our customers aren't, the owners are taking responsibility of buying them. But say you are, there are always periods in which you'll need the EUAs yourself, for any off-hire periods, for example. And being able to collect that war chest at below €60 is, very attractive and definitely an opportunity.
Would you be willing to give your thoughts on where that price is likely to go over the coming, let's say, obviously leading up to September 2025 is the interesting point. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I would just say that, bear in mind, often people think that shipping is a lot larger part of the ETS than it really is.
Okay.
That shippings are going to be about 5 or 6% of the ETS when it's fully phased in. So in year one, this year, it's only 40% of that 5%. So shipping is actually a drop in the ocean, and doesn't really, it won't really make any difference, I don't think, to the price itself. What will make a difference to the price is the fact that the reason why we're seeing a lot of this depression now is that there's extra supply coming on the market, which has been mandated by the EU for their part of their Repower EU scheme. So there's extra EUA supply combined at a time when gas prices are very low and German industry output is so reduced. But I think that's going to change it's going to take a while. I don't see prices getting back to where they were this year. Could be famous last words here, but I wouldn't bet on prices getting back to really where they were, the like 90, €95 mark, for another couple of years. I think we will start to see a recovery. At some point, you just get to the point where everyone will look at this market and be like, actually, it is pricing far too low. I mean, we've come off another couple of euros today. There seems to be no end in sight, but we know that there is.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Pasquale, do you have any last thoughts as we come towards the end of this this webinar discussion?
Yes, thank you. As operator, what we can see is that this transition to the new, let's say, energy environment, let's say, is set. But we, as operator, we should have also the possibility to implement new regulations by using the new low carbon fuels. As ETS, as cap and trade market, has been set by let's say researchers that we should reach a price of 150 200 euro per tons of CO2, unless you don't have let's say a reduction of difference between the cost of fossil fuel and alternative fuels. By the way, in LCA approach, if you make some calculation for FuelEU, you will see that the low carbon fuel not produced by alternative solutions are penalized against the fossil fuel. And as we can see, I just read some data of researcher of 2021. Shipping fuel shift needs about 450 metric tons of ammonia methanol through 80 metric tons of hydrogen. But in 2021, just 0.36 tons of hydrogen have been produced. So the scalability is very tough in this way. And as operator, you know that we are doing trump shipping. We are not calling always the same ports. For us, it's very, very difficult nowadays to apply new rules. So I strongly believe that something should change in the near future. So to let us use new low carbon fuels.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot of things you mentioned there that I'd like to spend a bit more time on, but we obviously are getting towards the very end. Ariel, just over to you. Do you have any last thoughts before we do bring it to a close?
Yeah, I'll keep it super brief. I think the real opportunity here is that there's so many ways organizations can set themselves up to be more resilient, both to how the regulations are today and how they'll evolve. I think if anything, we know that things are going to change. EUA costs are going to fluctuate. New regulations are going to come in. More teeth is going to be added. And so figuring out who the right partners to work with are to maximize transparency, your ability to simulate different outcomes, changes in market, changes in regulation, changes in vessel performance, all of these things will come together. And even if the penalties aren't super severe today, really finding those right people to partner with to drive forward there will be important. So far is one among many, but really there's a big opportunity right now to organize in a way to make your company more resilient to the change coming ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I always like hearing opportunities. And Ralf, what are any last thoughts before we do bring the webinar to a close?
Yes. So what I believe is emissions have a price. It's clear. Emission trading will foster innovation because the price pressure will put pressure on companies becoming innovative. Even small nuclear is an option, and that has zero emissions. Also, I think EU ETS is just the beginning of a global carbon trading scheme. I think IMO, some governments in Asia, the US, and the EU are already working on that. And my final comment is, if you need help on EU ETS, just message me, and OceanScore is willing to help you.
Excellent. Well, in that case, thank you very much to all of you. I think it's been very, very interesting. For me, it's been very enlightening. I think we've touched on a lot of different subjects and looked at the different points of view. And hopefully this has served to provide a bit of much needed information to people out there. This webinar has been recorded, and so will also be then shared on YouTube once it's been properly edited. And so that should be interesting to view then. I would like to again say big thank you to BS Group, the organizer, and the second of these webinars will be held on the 20th of February at the same time. So hopefully everyone will log in again for that. And also like to say a huge thank you to the sponsors, to OceanScore and to Sofar Ocean for making today possible. Thank you very much for the support. And massive thank you to the speakers and to all of the attendees, and for everyone's participation in the questions and answers. There were a lot of questions that came up on the screen that I wasn't able to get to, but I noticed that a lot of the answers were given. And the largest response in terms of my last question, how optimistic are you? 42% said that they are optimistic. So I think that's certainly good news for going forward. So that does bring us to end. Thank you all very much to all of you, Hugo, Pasquale, Ariel, and Ralf, for joining us, and very much looking forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.